Today I'll be working in my workbook called Ruth, A Story of Faith, and it's on the whole book of Ruth. Um, I wanted to show you really quickly when the story of Ruth happens, and it happens sometime in the time of Judges. And so it's hard to pinpoint exactly. It is before the book of Samuel. It's listed that way in the Bible, but it also is a story just before Samuel, somewhere in the time of Ruth. And we know that because of number of references it makes about um, the same things that judges are covering. So there's that. And I also wanted to show you on the map the journey that Naomi and Ruth will make. Originally, Naomi and her family will go from Bethlehem down to Moab, and then they will Ruth and Naomi will go back up to Bethlehem. And so this is the map of the two trips that they will be making during this book. Okay, now looking at the table of contents, we have 4 chapters on this and and that covers the 4 chapters in the book of Ruth. And so let's start with the first one. Naomi returns with Ruth. Ruth 1, verses 1 through 22. Ruth 1, 1a. In the days when judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. This is what tells us that, of course, it's during the book of Judges. In the days when judges ruled, this tells us that this story happens during the book of Judges, or the first part of 1 Samuel, the last judge, which places the story between 1387 BC, or during the first judge, Othniel, or 1010 BC, or the death of Samuel, the last judge. It is strongly believed that the story of Ruth is written by Samuel based on the information given at the end of the book. There was a famine in the land, means food was scarce in the land of Israel. In the book of Judges, the relationship between Israel and God was cyclical. When the Israelite people believed and worshiped God, life was good and crops grew well. When the Israelites worshiped other gods, then they and their land were not blessed. There was a famine in the land. Now tells us they're during that low part of this cycle. When did the story of Ruth happen? During the book of Judges. Who probably wrote the book of Ruth? Samuel, based on the last part of last part of Ruth. And if there was a famine in the land, what did that mean as far as the relationship between Israelites and God? That they were far away from God at that point. So Ruth 1, 1b. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Amalek, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Where was the family from? Bethlehem. Where did they travel to? Moab. This was against God's plan for Hebrews, Deuteronomy 23:6. Do not seek a treaty of friendship with them, the Moabites, as long as you live. How long did they tend to live in Moab? To live for a while. This turns out to be 10 years. They were Ephrathites from the Bethlehem, Judah. What is an Ephrathite? Person from Ephrath. Ephrath was a prior name of Bethlehem. Genesis 35:19. So Rachel died and was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come from me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. I actually, side note here, I actually learned about the name Ephrathah, when I was in the Philippines as a missionary, and there was a church retreat area that was called Ephrathah, and that's how I going, Ephrathah, what does that mean? And so I was able to find and discover that it meant Bethlehem. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, Ruth 1:3. Now Amalek, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her two sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other one Ruth. After they lived there for 10 years, both Mahan and Kilion also died, and Naomi was left without her two sons and her husband. Who died first? Amalek. What nation did the wives of Mahan and Kilion come from? They came from Moab. This was the second error this family made. According to Deuteronomy 7:3-4, Hebrews were not to marry outside of their own race. Deuteronomy 7:3-4. Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and quickly destroy you. How long did the family of Naomi live in the land of Moab? 10 years. How many widows are there? There are 3 widows. Yet this story is only focused on Naomi's loss because her situation was the most desperate. What was the status of a widow during this time? According to the Smith Bible Dictionary, under the Mosaic dispensation, no legal provision was made for the maintenance of widows. They were left dependent partly on the affection of relations, more especially of the eldest son, whose birthright or extra share of the property imposed such a duty upon him, and partly on the privileges accorded to other distressed classes. So if they had sons, then they were taken care of by their sons. But if they had no sons, then technically the society was to take care of them, but there was no Social Security or welfare or any Medicare or anything like that. So a widow can often be destitute. Ruth 1:6. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of her people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, set out on the road that would take them back to Judah, the land of Judah. What had Naomi heard? That the Lord had come to the aid of his people and provided food for them. So they were on the upswing. They were starting to believe in God again. Aid of his people, God was now blessing the Israelites. What land was Naomi going to? Back to the land of Judah, where she came from. Where is Naomi's home? Bethlehem. Bethlehem. There's another reason that Naomi is returning home. Being a widow, she needs to depend on her family, specifically male relations, for support, and she had no other family in the land of Moab. Did both daughter-in-laws initially go with her? Yes, indeed they did. So it appears that the whole family lived south of where Ruth and Orpah came from. Interesting the ways of God. Both Ruth and Orpah had no children from Mahlon and Kilion. While it is possible that they had just married before Mahlon and Kilion's death, the relationship between Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law indicate a much longer time together. If Ruth had a son or daughter, her future story might have been much different. Not much is written about Naomi's general character and belief in God, but if you read between the lines, she had to be a wonderful woman of faith, as her 2 daughters-in-law, who were raised with the belief in multiple gods and had extended families, stay with her when their husbands die instead of immediately running back to their own families for support. Ruth 1:8. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. What does Naomi tell her 2 daughters-in-law? To go back to their mother's home, basically back where they were raised. They would have been better marriage prospects with their own people of Moab than in Israel, as Hebrews were not supposed to marry Moabites. So she's basically releasing them and allowing them to go back to their homeland. Did Naomi send Orpah and Ruth to their father's house or in their mother's house? To their mother's house. In desert areas, which the land of Moab was, men and women lived in separate tents or living quarters. Why did Naomi hope that God would show kindness to Orpah and Ruth? Because they had shown kindness to her and to her sons. What was the second blessing Naomi hoped that God would bestow on Orpah and Ruth? To find new husbands. What does this passage tell us about the character of the two Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah? That they were very wonderful ladies, both good people. Ruth, Naomi loved very much. What does this passage tell us about the character Naomi? That she does love her daughter-in-laws very much, and she wishes the best for them. The importance of the strong relationship between these three men and women say a lot. If Ruth and Orpah had kept with the ideal idol worship that they had grown up with, or if Naomi had not been gracious to them, even though Ruth and Orpah were not Hebrews, this bond between them would not have been as strong. Ruth 1:9. Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud, and said to her, We will go back with you to your people. But Naomi said, Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me. Based on verses 9b and 10, describe the relationship between Naomi and her daughters-in-law. It was very, very close. They wept out aloud, and they did not want to part or separate. They had a very, very close connection. Naomi is referring to the Jewish law of kinsman redeemer. This law stated that a close male relative had a responsibility to act for a relative that is in trouble. If a Jewish man became poor and had to sell his land, the kinsman redeemer would go and purchase the land back. If a Jewish man sold himself into slavery, his kinsman redeemer would buy him back. If a Jewish man was murdered, his kinsman redeemer would avenge his death. And lastly, if a man died, leaving a widow with no son, the kinsman redeemer needed to marry the widow to keep her and the land owned in the family. Basically, the law of kinsman redeemer meant that the nearest kin had the responsibility of redeeming his kinsman's lost opportunities. Jesus Christ is our kinsman redeemer. He purchased us out of slavery, blesses us, and avenges the wrong done against us. How does the law of kinsman redeemer show up in these verses? Basically, Naomi is going to the concept of if she had sons, they would first have to marry these ladies. And that's just illogical. These ladies are older and they would have to wait, 15 years before her sons grew up again? Even if she was married that day, she's just saying this is not logical. Now, she's not thinking about the other parts of the kinsman redeemer, but she is thinking about having sons again, and that would be, but there were other ways that they could use kinsman redeemer, as we will find out in the book. Even though Naomi feels the Lord's hand is turned against her, where is she heading? She's heading right back into Israel, into Bethlehem. So even though she feels the Lord's hand's against her, she's going right back into the Lord's country. Ruth 1:14. At this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. Who decided to go back to her people instead of staying with Naomi? Orpah. Notice what Naomi says. Your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods, not the gods of Moab or the gods of your family, but her gods. Let's look at possible reasons why Naomi was trying to be so persuasive. What was the nationality of Orpah and Ruth? Moab. Therefore, they would have a hard time finding husbands in Judah. What was the life of a widow? Very harsh, very hard to live by yourself without any sense to take care of you. Naomi already knew her life would be hard in Judah, but having a burden of another woman to feed would be even harder. Who had Orpah and Ruth been married to? Naomi's two sons. Having them around may remind her of what she lost. What does Naomi say about the Lord in verse 13? That he has basically cursed her. Let's see, 13. The Lord's hand had turned against her. She may have thought if the Lord's hand had turned against her, perhaps due to her family moving to Moab and taking Moabite women or wives, what more misfortune did God have for her? So that's why Naomi was trying to be very persuasive with her two daughters-in-law. Then we come to the key scripture of Ruth, used often in marriages. Ruth 1, 16, 17. But Ruth said, entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God and my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. The Lord do so to me and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. That is a true commitment. Ruth 1:8. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them, and women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Now, it's always strange to me in these stories in the Bible that after so many years, they still remember the people. This happened several times in the Bible, and I'm thinking, they've been gone for many years, but that's the life that was there, and not many people moved. To Ruth's wonderful and beautiful statement of love, what was Naomi's response? She stopped urging her. Quite a mellow response to Ruth's statement of love. She just stopped urging her. Where did the two women go to? They went to Bethlehem. This was a 30 to 50-mile journey and would have taken them about 7 to 10 days due to rugged terrain. Was Naomi recognized? Yes, she was. This is after a minimum of 10 years. When Naomi originally left Bethlehem, who was with her? Her husband and her two sons. When the women wonder if this is Naomi, they would also see easily that she is without the family she left with. So their question also implies, what happened to Naomi? Ruth 1:20. Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. The name Naomi means pleasant. The name Mara means bitter. Why does Naomi want to be called Mara? Because her life has become very bitter. How did she leave Bethlehem full? She had a husband and two sons. Naomi says, the Lord brought me back empty. Is she alone? No, she's not. Ruth is with her. Does she introduce Ruth or mention her in any way? No, she does not. Who does Naomi blame for her loss? God. Naomi says 4 negative statements about the Lord here. What are they? The Almighty has made my life very bitter. The Lord has brought me back empty. The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Yet for all the anger against God, where did she move back to? Bethlehem. Even in her anger, she runs to God instead of away from him. And scriptures continue. Ruth 1:22. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. This is a summary of what had happened, except for one piece of new information. What did we learn? That they arrived during the time of the barley harvest. This helps us know what time of year it was. We know the main crops of the land of Israel. They're listed in Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 8:7-8. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with brooks, streams, and deep springs gushing out into valleys and hills, a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil, and honey, a land where bread would not be scarce and you will lack nothing, a land where the rocks are iron and you could dig copper out of the hills. But what seasons produce what food? Many of the festivals of Israel are around the harvesting of the food. At the Feast of Unleavened Bread in the spring, the first fruits of grain would be offered. This tells us all grain, wheat, barley, oats, harvest around this time or by the end of May. Barley being the first grain to be harvested around April. Summer brought in the first of the fruits, grapes. The Festival of Weeks is usually celebrated about 7 weeks after Pentecost, which includes a celebration of new wine. Autumn brought in the figs, pomegranates, and olives, which were celebrated during the Festival of Tabernacles that happens in October. If the barley harvest was just beginning, what month of year is it? The month of year would be uh, April, around April. Our months, that is, April. So now we come to the end of this chapter. So, number 2 across, the family of Naomi traveled from Bethlehem to what country? Moab. Number 5, in Ruth 1, 11 through 13, Naomi is referring to the law of kinsman redeemer. Number 6, who is Naomi's husband? That's Amalek. Of her 2 daughters-in-law, which one stayed with Naomi? Ruth. When Naomi and Ruth returned to Bethlehem, what grain harvest was just beginning? Barley. Who is generally believed to be the author of the book of Ruth? Samuel. Naomi's 2 daughter-in-laws are Ruth and Orpah. One down. This means when a food is scarce, famine. Instead of Naomi, what did Naomi want to be called? Mara. 3, the story of Ruth happens during the time of Judges. What is Ruth's hometown? Bethlehem or Ephrath? Let's see, which one would we use? E-E-T-H-E. Probably Ephrathah. Well, one of those. Naomi's 2 sons are Mahlon and Kilian. 8, after the death of her 2 sons, Naomi was traveling back to the land of Judah. And that's the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Let's see, I do have the answer here, which one I'm using as far as Bethlehem. Okay, so I'm using Bethlehem. Okay, so that's the end of this chapter. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Come on. I'd stop this, but come on. There you are.